Hi there. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Chrissy Hodges. I'm so honored to be here at Mental Health on the Mighty. I love this community. I love being part of it, and I love being able to hear everybody's stories and what people are going through. It's so exciting. I am a mental health advocate. I'm the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And I'm also a peer support specialist and a consultant with treatmentforocd.com. And of course, the first comment is going to be about my hair. Hi, Naris. That is an awesome way to break the ice. Today, I wanted to talk about something that's super personal to me and something that I really focus on, not only in peer support, but when I am talking in my blogs and when I'm talking to people in general about mental illness. People think about mental illness, no matter what type it is, y'all. I mean, whether it's OCD or bipolar disorder or a personality disorder or a depression or anything, people always think that it's just about the symptoms and why don't people take their meds and why don't people do this and maybe they should get off the couch and everything else. You know, all the crap we hear that we know isn't true. But I like to focus on understanding how complex mental illness is, how complex it affects, or how in depth it affects us. Mental illness is so much more of an emotional illness than I feel like than a physical illness at times. All of the emotions of shame, embarrassment, anger, everything that comes along with it. So I wrote this blog recently, and it was very personal to me, and I got a lot of really great response from it. And it's called The Lying Voice of Mental Illness. So I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about that blog and about some of the things and reasons why I decided to write that blog and how it applies to my life. I can only really talk about my own personal experience, but I'm hoping that you will be able to relate from your personal story and the things that you've been through with mental illness. The Lying Voice of Mental Illness. The blog is at, if you want to read it, it's at, what is it? battlingtheocddemon.wordpress.com. And what this is about is what happens when you find out that you're living with a mental illness. For me, I want to read a passage from it actually, so you can understand where I'm coming from. For me, it was a break from who I wanted to be and a break from who I thought that I could be. When I was diagnosed with a mental illness, the first thing that happened was fear. It was, now I am somebody that can't do this. I'm whatever. And so I want to read a paragraph from this. When I was diagnosed with mental illness, this is how I felt. A dark cloud settled around my head and in my thoughts. When I tried to face it, it retreated in the darkness of my shadow, hiding from any confrontation. It laced my every reaction, every decision, and every interaction. I was no longer the Chrissy I once knew. I cowered at the doubt and shame of mental illness that had absconded with my optimism and confidence. Now let me just point one thing out. I wasn't that confident in my life because I had been saturated in symptoms for like 12 years. But it was that moment where there was a sigh of relief of, okay, there's an explanation of why I had been through this horrible turmoil for so long. I had OCD for 12 years before I attempted suicide and was inpatient and diagnosed, which saved my life, medication and therapy. But what happened is that I all of a sudden was flooded with, what does mental illness mean? All I knew was what media portrayed mental illness for. And y'all, we all know they do not portray us in a wonderful light. I mean, seriously. So, all I knew was what I had seen, what I had heard, and to be honest, like whatever movies I had watched, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, things like that. And so I just thought, oh my gosh, is that who I am? Is that what my life is going to be? I was terrified. And and I'll talk about my recovery process when we're talking about this, but this is one of the reoccurring themes, not only with me, but for the people that I've worked for with peer support, and especially recently, just the fear almost of, okay, I now know what I have. I'm going to go down a treatment path. There's a possibility that I will be able to manage these symptoms, but then what? Then you're left with this huge, these huge flashing lights pretty much of like mental illness and stigma and everything else. And it's hard. It's a hard journey. That was a long-winded way of telling you why I'm doing this video. But one of the reasons was, especially I'm a peer support specialist here in Denver at the state institution. And this was one of the most reoccurring themes I ever heard from people. And it was for me too, when I was inpatient in a locked facility, was, what am I going to do when I get out? What if people find out? What if people know I was in an inpatient hospital, that I have been on psychotropic drugs, that I have a mental illness diagnosis? What does that mean for me in my future? And all of a sudden, instead of being able to see it, like I am hoping beyond hope, and Mental Health on the Mighty, and all of you and people that share your stories and bring this to light, I'm hoping we can break this down. That people don't have to be afraid when they get diagnosis and when they're going into treatment and then they're working toward recovery. But that, unfortunately, is a reality for so many of us. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that happen that are just on top of the symptoms that we have to deal with. One of the things that someone said to me the other day that someone I was working with, she said, I've been working toward recovery and I feel like I've finally gotten to recovery, and now what? I don't feel happy. I don't feel like I should have been, or I should feel about being in recovery. And I thought that was really interesting, and I tried to relate it to my own story. And if you followed any of my videos or you follow any of my stuff, you know that after my diagnosis and successful treatment, I spent a lot of time in personal stigma for years and years and years. And when she said this, I realized what happens is that we lose sight of purpose. We lose sight of, not everybody, I'm just saying me and the clients that I've been able to relate to, and hopefully you can relate to this. We lose sight of what life could have been, without mental illness, because many people will think to themselves, if I only didn't have this illness, things would be so much different. Now, of course, people are going to think that with physical illness too, right? But with mental illness, there's just something different. One of the things that I hear a lot, and one of the things that I felt so much was, even in my symptoms and after my symptoms, was jealousy for people who didn't have to deal with these, that were really just dealing with like life's little problems. And now I know everybody has huge problems, and we don't always know, but you know what I'm saying. Like people are arguing at Starbucks about stuff, or like on Facebook about stuff, and you're thinking to yourself, I could barely get out of bed today because my symptoms are so horrible, or I'm contemplating suicide, and someone's over here like giving the barista a hard time about, a tall latte, so it's that I had so much jealousy of, I wish I could just be upset about this and that, and like the stupid little things I thought, that people just really take advantage of when they don't know what it's like to have a mental illness. And then after I got treatment and successful therapy, it didn't stop for me. It was, well, you know what? I wasted a huge chunk of my life dealing with this, and everybody else has kind of moved on. Everybody else is, moving up in the workforce, and, they're getting the jobs that they want, and, they're having these relationships. And I was afraid I would never have a meaningful relationship, because what if someone found out about what I had been through? What is someone going to think about when they find out I was in a locked inpatient facility, that I attempted suicide? All of those things, which are other fears that come up. So I had a great deal of jealousy and fear that I would never be able to live or catch up with everybody else, the people that were my age or the people around my age. They had a jump on me in life, if that makes sense. So also when I entered my 20s, it was like everybody's life seems to be so great. I mean, let's just be real here. The 20s can be tough anyway. When I was even a lot younger, I used to call them the terrible 20s, because I just feel like everybody's probably really lost, but nobody wants to say it. You're trying to figure out what you believe. You try to figure out who you are, what you want to do, all this other stuff. But when you have mental illness, when you're dealing with your symptoms, it makes things so much worse. But then when you're even after your symptoms and you're starting to work toward recovery after the medical portion of your illness is treated, it is just there is just so, like I said before, relationship wise. Hello everyone. I can see your hellos and highs. Thank you for being here. One of the things that I hear a lot from people, and I felt like, was, now that I have been through this or I have a diagnosis, I am damaged goods. In relationships, in friendships, in family relationships. It's this, and I think the hard part is, a lot of times people are diagnosed and they experience symptoms so young. And then, when you're younger and then you're in teenage years and early 20s, it's like you have your whole life ahead of you. And we're thinking, oh, I'm great, I have my whole life ahead of you. But you know what, I'm only 20 years old and I feel like I've lived 80 years. Because I'm tired. I've been dealing with these symptoms for a long time. And so it's moving into, it's like entering the real world with this illness that not everybody is going to be able to understand, not everybody's going to get, and you're terrified that people are going to judge you because of it. So the damaged goods piece is huge for me. I don't know if it's huge for you, but it was. I don't know. One person that I work with, she put it in such a good way. She was like, why would anyone want to be with me if they could be with someone that didn't have all this horrible mental illness baggage? And I remember she said that to me, and it was like, girl just spoke my language. Like, she gets it. And it was the first time anyone had ever related to how I had felt for so long. And I was so appreciative that I didn't have to go through that alone. Other things, how am I going to be able to work? How am I going to be able to get ahead when other people have gotten the jump on me? When other people had to deal with this stupid illness or whatever? And what if my employer finds out? What if my employer finds out I'm on medication? What if they find out I'd been hospitalized? And then there's so the story for me was, I was not ready. I didn't tell anybody about my illness for 12 years. And I had to get insurance at one point. I wasn't working for anybody. I started my own business, and I went to an insurance agent. And I told him, I said, look, he said, have you had any surgeries? And I said something like, yeah, I had stomach surgery because I attempted suicide. And he said, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. And he said, just so you know, if you ever want insurance, don't ever tell anybody about your suicide attempt or your mental illness. Now, I know that he was protecting me. I mean, seriously, he was giving me a heads up of like, you want insurance, girl, you better be quiet. But talk about like, let's put you right back into that closet of shame and guilt, huh? That is what happened. Because then I was like, oh my gosh, the one time I actually did open up and tell someone, he's like, don't ever open up and tell anybody. Or you're not going to be able to have the other things that other people in life get to have. It was devastating. And actually that shut me up for another 6-7 years. And it made me terrified to tell anybody else. Another thing was, how is this going to taint every single relationship that I have? How are people going to trust me? Now, I knew I was able to be trusted. But the media will tell you that people with mental illness sometimes can't be trusted. Oh, I hate them. Now, we know, what our limits are. And we know that this is not a reality. But when we're thinking about talking to people and having friendships and even relationships and family and relationships with loved ones, it's, what if they find out and then they feel like they can't trust us, or if they're worried that anything that they say, because we're so fragile, that things might blow up. And And what if they are afraid it might come back? I mean, I've always been afraid that it would come back. You know, once I got things under control and was in recovery. Of course, that's always a fear of mine. What if it comes back and it's so horrible this time that I'm not going to be able to function? This is just another question in this aftermath and the things that we face, the complex things that we face in mental illness that are just added on top of our symptoms. You know, I worry that people would treat me different if they found out what I'd been through, if they found out I had a suicide attempt. You know, I never wore like a bikini. I had a scar on my stomach. So I just thought, you know, what if people found out? How different would they think about me? Or, you know what if they made up some story and then they started telling other people? So there's just, for me, a lot of shame and fear in regards to telling my story, especially with the type of OCD I have, pure OCD. The intrusive thoughts are super shameful. They're violent, sexual, and blasphemous in nature. And so I thought, if people might not believe I really have OCD, they probably just believe I am like this monster that has these horrible thoughts. And one day I'm going to snap and I'm going to act on them. And that was really scary for me. So what happens is that when we're experiencing, in my experience and the people that I've worked with, when we're experiencing all this stuff and all of these fears, it's almost like, you know, we're living this life, but it's just the same as living the life bound by the symptoms. You know, and then when you're having both of them, that's even like a tighter rope, you know, that you can't move and you're just stuck. So that's why I always like to emphasize that dealing with the emotional side of mental illness and all of the fears and secondary fears that come out, first of all, you're not alone. I mean, I cannot tell you about the countless people I have worked with across the span of every diagnosis possible that feels every fear I've just mentioned and more. And how shameful it is to talk to anybody about, because if you say it out loud, you feel like you're going to project even more of that on you, and that you're going to feel needy and you're going to feel like a victim and all of the stuff that just keeps you silent and keeps you quiet. My message today is that you aren't alone. That's always my message, but today especially. But also my message today is about the grieving process. My blog that I told you about earlier, The Lying Voice of Mental Illness, which is at battlingtheocddemon.wordpress.com. Sorry, there's so many things. That particular talks about all of these fears that we might experience. But the grieving process, I feel like, is so important. It was so important for me. When I finally worked through all this crap, after 13 years, all the emotional turmoil, I realized, and I mentioned this in my last video too, this is why I feel like it's so important to me. I realized what the life I had been living was in the shadow of who I thought I could have been if I didn't have mental illness. It also was the grieving process for the 12 years that I lived with that illness that stole my childhood and stole my teenage years. Now that might seem victim-oriented, and you know what? I am a victim of my illness. Like, if I want to be honest, like, I was victimized by OCD. But being able to recognize that and say, yeah, that was horrible. I'm sad about it. I'm angry about it. I wish it could have been different. And thinking to myself, I have to let go of who I thought this person would have been if she hadn't gone through all of the things with mental illness and all of the aftermath with all those questions that really kept me under my thumb. And grieving is hard. As many of you know, I mean, if you've lost someone, or if you've experienced something that causes grief, God, you just have no control over grief sometimes. You just have to go through it. You can hide from it. You can try to jump over it. You can escape from it. But you know what? It doesn't stop until you go through it, right? So this process, I feel like, is so important when it comes to mental illness, and something that I feel like also is very much not recognized and overlooked. A lot of times when you're going to professionals for mental illness, it is, we've got to get your symptoms under control, and then when your symptoms are under control, yay, look, you're better, go out in the world and do everything that you can, and you're left with this shell of a person sometimes with the emotions that you're just that are just racking your mind and everything else. And you may think to yourself, well, I am in recovery, so why am I not happy? Why am I not productive? Then there's something else must be wrong. If you felt like that, yes, there is something else wrong. And that is, it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be pissed off and sad and feel ashamed and feel embarrassed. It's okay to feel all this stuff. I never knew it was okay. And if I had, I maybe have, and I also didn't know that I thought I was alone. I thought I was selfish, like the only person that, look, I was able to, get my symptoms under control. Yes, I still have symptoms, but, get them to where it wasn't affecting me before. And here I am, I can't even enjoy life. I must be the most selfish person on the planet. Nope. This is part of living with a mental illness that changes your life. It changes who you are, how you think. So let's talk about the positives, the positive changes. My hope for all of you going through this process, if you can relate to what I'm saying, my hope is that you can hold on, which is what I had to do when I finally realized all this was going on, that there are good things that can come out of this. For me, the absolute best thing was the change in my worldview. I was 20 years old when I was diagnosed. I was completely, I completely stigmatized people with mental illness. I was a jerk. I didn't know. I was living with a mental illness and I didn't even know it. And when I went into that inpatient hospital, and I've shared this with you before on videos, and I was judging people, I was such a brat. And then when I finally took the time to let my guard down and meet these wonderful people, my whole worldview changed. People that have mental illness aren't these people you have to be afraid of. They aren't people that are losers and, they're on the streets and they're this and that and everything that society wants you to think that they are. They're like me. They're like you. They have careers. They can have careers. They are smart. They can love. They can be appreciative of everything. They have hobbies. They have goals. They're wonderful, intuitive people. And this stuff, all this crap we go through with mental illness, deepens that ability. It deepens our ability to be empathetic, compassionate. We exist on a different level of humanity. That is the positive. That's what I hang on to when things get tough. And when I think, maybe this is the time when the symptoms come back, it's never going to be okay again, I try to think, look where it's gotten you, to a point where I can interact with people whose experiences I could never understand, the way that some people can't understand my experience, but I can sit there with people and believe them, which I feel like is the most important. Hold their hand, cry with them, laugh with them. It is one of the greatest things that comes with mental illness and living with it and being able to have empathy and meet people where they're at with it. Other great things, once you've been through something that just takes you through the ringer and back, y'all know what I mean, you really can start to appreciate people when they go through hardship. You can see people in a different light. You can understand, especially with us, you understand stigma, even outside of mental illness, how stigma affects people, how it affects their actions, how it affects how they think about themselves and their confidence. And just in general, I have a greater appreciation for people. I love hearing people's stories, and I love laughing with people, and I love being able to see that we are strong, resilient people. You know, I say that all the time. We're strong, resilient people, and we can get through a lot. And to be able to sit and share that with somebody and laugh with them and cry with them and celebrate all the things that we've been through, whether we're going through something challenging or not. There are so many levels of things that are good about the experiences that we go through. Recovery is fluid. It doesn't end when you get your symptoms under control. It doesn't end when you get done grieving. I look at it as a lifelong process. I'm continually learning. But you know what? I learn from you. I learn from individuals who have had similar experiences or experiences that aren't similar. I learn from you. And when I hear other people's stories, I am like, oh my gosh, I felt that same way. I'm not alone. And it helps me deepen that recovery and to feel more confident. Because when you know that other people have felt like you are feeling and what you've been through, when you know that, it's almost like putting on this invisible shield and you're like, I can do this. Because I know that girl over there, she has experienced the same thing and she's done it. And if she can do it, I can do it. So that is my message today. I wanted to read, I read a little bit of my blog earlier, but I wanted to read one of the last paragraphs in it to kind of round up. Once decided I finished grieving, one day I woke up. On the heels of a crippling relapse, I needed positive affirmations to get through my symptoms. And as my affirmations began to solidify as truths with my illness, it also began shedding light on who I had become, and I was tired of grieving. I was tired of hiding in silence, and I was tired of not being good enough for anyone or anything. I wanted to learn to like myself. And I wanted to get to know who Chrissy was without all the illness and without the grief. My thought process went from absolute negatives of wandering lost and lonely in a world of colorful array and hope. I began shedding the anger, shame, guilt, and sadness that kept me company in a dark hole of a life I had been living. But I didn't shed it with regret. Each layer of emotion had been essential to move through, to shape me, and to let go of the past. And each stage of grief I occupied was exactly the right amount of time I needed to plant my feet in the new solid foundation. Where are you today in your recovery? What stage of grief or celebration are you at? Because wherever you're at, it's essential. It's part of being a human. Not just part of being someone with mental illness. For me, it took a long time to figure out there doesn't have to be Chrissy that defines mental illness and suicidal thoughts and depression in my OCD. And I also didn't have to be the person that, OCD, okay, well, somebody like Chrissy. Depression, somebody like Chrissy. Suicide, somebody like Chrissy. There doesn't have to be a line where your illness stops and you begin. Or you stop and it begins. You can coexist with it in recovery. And I see a question down there that says, what do you mean recovery? So this is actually a good spot to say, many people define recovery as being able to recover from what you have gone through with mental illness. So recovery is different for everybody, so I can only tell you what it is to me, and I hope that's okay. I shared this in my last video with Mental Health and the Mighty, that there were two types of recovery for me. There was medical recovery. This was imperative to get my symptoms under control, whatever that meant. If that meant medication, therapy, whatever I needed to do to get those symptoms under control, because they ruled my life. I was a slave to my symptoms. So that took a long time to be able to find medical recovery with obsessive compulsive disorder and depression. Once I got through that, I had to go through what I've been talking about today, which I like to term the emotional recovery. I also call it personal stigma. And what this was going through all of the emotions related to having mental illness, how I could relate to the world as somebody with a mental illness, and to be able to process how I felt about myself and that mental illness. What that meant for me was a lot of anger. To be honest, I spent a lot of time in anger. A lot of sadness, a lot of shame, guilt, and embarrassment. Those were probably the big five for me. And it took years and years. Once I finally reached emotional recovery was after a relapse, and then when I started meeting peers. People who could tell me that it's okay to experience what you have, and you know what? Me too. And then I found out I wasn't alone. And once I realized that everything I was experiencing was normal, it helped me to learn to love who I was, despite what I had been through, despite the illness, and started to see that I actually didn't have to hate the illness and what I'd been through either. So my recovery came at two different times, a span of 25 years. And I continue to work on my recovery every single day with coping skills, the things that I do daily to help, maintain, but also working with people as a peer support specialist and helping them through their own emotional recovery. And I learn so much from the people that I work with. I mean, I'm there to support them and meet them where they're at, but I'm going to tell you, I work with some amazing, amazing people who remind me how fortunate I am to be able to live and be an advocate and to be able to give back after what I went through. So anyway, thank you for joining me. That was a pretty long video. My apologies. I usually try to keep them short. Feel free to drop a comment in the comment sections. I'll be going back and forth in the next day or two, and I'll answer things that you're asking if I didn't get to it. I just want to say, again, thank you for this community. Thank you for being a part of the community. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the comments, or you can email me at ocd.chrissie@gmail.com. That's ocd.chrissie@gmail.com. I do consultations for referrals and resources for OCD at treatmentforocd.com. And you can find out more about me and peer support services and my sessions and things like that at chrissiehodges.com. I'll drop it in the comments for you. Actually, I think it's at the thing above. But anyway, thank you for being here. Next month, I'm going to be in San Francisco doing this video at the International OCD Conference. I'm so excited. I'm hoping that I can do it at a different time and I can bring on a lot of people with OCD, and I'm thinking about broadcasting from the Golden Gate Bridge. Yay! So anyway, I'm so excited about next month, but thank you for being here. And if you're interested in ordering my book, Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. Sorry, that's so dirty. You can find it on Amazon or booklocker.com. Thank you again. I look forward to seeing you next month, and I hope you're having a lovely day.